little truth in the old refrain that one cannot legislate equality.
Thurgood Marshall, how he broke the barrier of segregated schools.
Thurgood Marshall was the first African American Supreme Court justice and a successful lawyer, having argued and won 29 out of the 32 cases. In 1967, he was nominated to the Supreme Court justice and served for 24 years. His most famous case was the Brown versus Board of Education. The case was about the segregation of schools. He retired in the year of 1991.
He was born on July 2nd, 1908. In grade school, he was a good student but often got in trouble due to him misbehaving. When he rode the bus, he had to sit in the back and the white kids got to sit in the front. He had a good education at Frederick Douglass High School in Baltimore, Maryland. After he graduated high school in 1925, he went to Lincoln University in Chester County, Pennsylvania. After he got suspended his second year, he started to get really serious about studying. After receiving his bachelor's degree, he enrolled in law school at Howard University in Washington, D.C. in 1930, which he graduated in 1933. He applied to the University of Maryland Law School but got denied due to his race. While at Howard, he got influenced by Charles Houston and other legal scholars who developed and perfected methods for winning civil rights lawsuits. After passing his bar exams in Maryland, he joined the NAACP, also known as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, as a counsel. When he participated in the desegregation of the University of Maryland Law School, to which he had been denied admission because of his race, Marshall became the director of the NAACP's Defense of Education Fund in 1939, after winning 29 of the 32 civil rights cases that he brought before the Supreme Court justice. On June 13, 1967, President Lyndon B. Johnson nominated Thurgood Marshall to be the first African American justice to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States.
During his time in the Supreme Court, he helped a lot of the civil rights movement. Some other cases that he helped with were the Murray versus Pearson, Chambers versus Florida, Smith versus Allred, and his most famous case was the Brown versus Board of Education. The case of Brown versus Board of Education, he issues the race-based segregation of children into separate but equal public schools consultation. This case got its name given to 5 separate cases that were heard by the Supreme Court. These cases were Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Briggs versus Elliott, Davis versus Board of Education of Prince Edward County, Balling versus Sharp, and Gebhardt versus Ethel. Again, Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund handled all these cases. Marshall personally argued this case before a court that segregation violated the so-called Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This case was the consolidation of cases arising in Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, and Washington, D.C., relating to the segregation of the public schools. The Supreme Court did not immediately try to give the direction for the implementation of its ruling. Rather, it asked the attorney generals of all states with laws permitting segregation to their schools to submit plans for how to proceed with desegregation. Desegregation was to proceed with all deliberate speed efforts that began with the Civil War amendments in the U.S. Constitution. These included the 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865 and prohibited slavery in the United States, 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, and promised equal protection under the law regardless of race. 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, and guaranteed African American men the right to vote. The plaintiffs of this court case were Oliver Brown, his daughter Linda Brown, Thurgood Marshall, Earl Warren, Rosa Parks, Ruby Bridges, Ella Baker, and so on.
This huge history-changing event impacted a lot of things, like the Civil Rights Movement. This impacted it by some of the cases like Brown v. Board of Education. As a counsel to the NAACP, he utilized judiciary to champion equality for African Americans. He played a vital part in the ending of segregation. He fought for individual rights and equality for all people. His actions helped to end all racial segregation and discrimination. He also impacted the modern U.S. judicial branch of today. He helped African Americans go to the same school as white people, and white people go to the same school as African Americans, and drink out of the same water fountains and sit wherever they want on the bus. And a lot of stuff like that. Marshall's strategy of attacking racial inequality through the courts represented a third way of pursuing racial equality. He fought for individual rights and equality for all people. He also helped shaping the African society today. People thought he was a great guy for what he did and how he helped continue the civil rights movement. It marked a turning point in the history of race relations in the U.S. It also impacted a lot of southern states like Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and so forth. The Jim Crow law was what started it. He was more than a series of rigid anti-black laws.
Thurgood Marshall broke the barrier of him being the first African American judge. He broke this by being a great judge in the NAACP, so he got nominated by President Lyndon Johnson in the year of 1967 on January 30th. He broke down racial barriers, including achieving one of the highest potential positions in the government. This was important to our history because he helped continue the civil rights movement, which was a huge thing in our history. And he changed on how we get educated these days and how we do a lot of other things in our daily life.